Salutations, fellow nerds. I'm Rick Y, and today is March 4th, 2025. This morning, Trump sent out a tweet, or whatever it is, and it struck my attention because it is really starting to appear, at least to me, as though he's setting up the game for a true authoritarian overhaul. While normally I would try to urge folks not to make too many assumptions about what politicians are saying, Trump has unfortunately been about as clear as a dog's bark on a still night when it comes to how he plans to approach this new American experience he's planning on ushering in. So if you dig news, history, or humorous American hogwash, drop a blue heart in the comments. Let's get at it. Now, as some of you screaming in my comment sections like to point out, we have a nation of checks and balances. So true dictatorial powers are actually extremely difficult to obtain. A lot has to go wrong for something like that to occur in our country. The problem is how much of it has already gone wrong and how deep in this mess that we happen to be. Many Americans don't see the warnings nor the dangers that are actually right there at our feet. Interestingly enough, I think that what he sees in Ukraine is a model for how he will try and do things here with a few modifications. You see, as some of you also scream about Zelensky being a dictator because he had to declare martial law while being invaded by a massive hostile force that poses an existential threat to his country, you ironically seem to misunderstand that this had to be approved by the Ukrainian parliament, the democratic legislative body. If you are incapable of fomenting enough critical thought to understand why elections in a country that is getting leveled by artillery is not a great idea, then I have my doubts when it comes to whether or not you're approaching anything with good faith. But how does this translate to Trump and his moves? Well, earlier this morning, he belched out a tweet that read, "All federal funding will stop for any college, school, or university that allows illegal protests. Agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. American students will be permanently expelled or, depending on the crime, arrested. No masks. Thank you for your attention in this matter." Now, do I feel like there's any veracity to this? Maybe. I don't think that it's legal in any way, shape, or form, and it's getting dangerously close to creating atmospheres like Kent State. Protests are not illegal. Trump cannot unilaterally withhold allocated funding on a whim, but the glaring word, agitators, stands out. Jesus Christ, just scared the hell out of me. I didn't even know you were up there. Hang on a second. You see, the term agitator is used often by authoritarian regimes when they face protests so as to create a title worthy of what many would say demands a harsh crackdown. This is a term that has been widely used consistently to try and delegitimize any dissent and take a peaceful process of redressing a government and rebranding it as some kind of criminal activity by dangerous people. Notable previous historical events that mirrored this rhetoric were seen in Serbia, Belarus, Russia, and the UAE. During the 2011-2013 Russian protests against Vladimir Putin and his return to the presidency, the Kremlin simply waved off the legitimate concerns of the Russian people as agitators and alleged that they were being orchestrated by external forces, with, shockingly enough, no evidence to support the claim. It did, however, result in detention, arrests, and unnecessary police brutality against demonstrators. The rhetoric that framed the protest as violent paved the way for the government of Russia to also enact more restrictive legislative measures. This was called the Snow Revolution. What Trump is doing is he is already getting it in his followers' minds that those who are practicing their First Amendment rights are violent dissidents in need of punitive recourse. However, although Trump and his cronies are probably fully aware that this won't be a popular move and will inevitably spark more protests, I believe fully that he will be using strife that he has fomented as president to claim that there's just so much turmoil in the United States that he's going to need to utilize the powers of the Insurrection Act of 1807. Now, typically, this would have to be done at the request of governors if they feel their own local law enforcement is unable to maintain order and peace, and the president determines that domestic unrest, rebellion, or lawlessness is deemed severe enough that federal intervention is necessary. Granted, courts are more than welcome to challenge it, but truthfully, not much would stand in the way between Trump and deploying United States military forces against its own people. Like much of this administration's spinning, It's here where we could actually see martial law enacted without them coming out and saying it. You see, like Russia did when it said it wasn't invading Ukraine, but engaging in a special military operation, or when Kellyanne Conway said that there are facts and alternative facts. Once the Insurrection Act is invoked, federal troops are then placed in roles of law enforcement officers. Due to the powers of the Insurrection Act that gives the president, this is where the dictatorial powers come into play. In more legal settings, this would be considered de facto suspension of civil liberties, not de jure. Interestingly enough, our Constitution doesn't allow for the president to call specifically for martial law and instead gives him broad powers that allow the executive office to curtail civil liberties, such as imposing curfews, the restriction of freedom to assemble, and increasing arrests without due process, and using military law enforcement in lieu of local officials. Once implemented without a defined timeline, we will officially be under martial law by all but name. Once Trump has those powers, it will be incumbent upon him and him alone to relinquish that control. As far as trusting him to do so, well, I've seen too many horses turn out to be mules. This morning's post by the president regarding students and protests really starts to give a bad taste in my mouth. It's personally concerning to me that he's making these declarations without provocation. There are currently no greater protests on campuses than there was during the initial phases of the IDF genocide against Palestinians. It causes me to wonder if this is a preemptive warning before the other shoe falls. Our allies are pulling away from us, and he's unilaterally chosen to stop sending resources to Ukraine. While geopolitically, Trump and his cabinet members are all clearly just proxies for the Kremlin, domestically, I fear he's much, much worse. The very threat that conservatives have decried when it comes to liberals and Marxism and tyranny is slapping them all across the face at the moment, and too many of them are still too hard-headed to see it clearly. Until that happens, I'm going to quote Ray Arnold from Jurassic Park when he so eloquently stated, "Hold on to your butts." Thanks for hanging in there. If you enjoy the content, make sure to drop a blue heart in the comment section and consider liking and subscribing. It's completely free, and if anything, it helps spread the word and really ruffles the feathers of the conservative beta trolls to the point that they feel the need to chime in, which is always funny to me. Y'all come back now. You hear?